Hey guys, it's Dean. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You've decided to add a Nintendo 64 to your game room. You got the console out and dusted off your old controllers and games, and then ran into one or two of these problems. You realized your TV doesn't support Nintendo 64's composite cables, or you noticed the Nintendo 64 controller cables are way shorter than you remembered. If that's the case, then about a year ago, I was in the same position as you. And my next step was to jump online and look for a perfect setup for modern day Nintendo 64 gaming. There were a few problems I ran into, however. The first was the fact that retro gaming has drastically changed in the past few years. Gone are the days of having the perfect all-in-one emulation machine connected to your TV when you'd play with modern Bluetooth controllers. No. Now, what everyone online recommends is to go fully retro. I'm talking CRTs and everything. To play retro games, it must feel like it too. If you don't believe me, jump on OfferUp right now and you'll see that TVs that people were begging to get rid of for free a few years ago now costing upwards of $50. Now that's all well and good, but the issue I faced is the fact that I don't have space in my house for a CRT next to my flat screen TV. And I wasn't going to take up 2 rooms for gaming. I just wanted one space for multiplayer gaming and one TV to connect all my modern and retro consoles to. The second issue I faced was people suggesting I spend a bunch of money on a few options that were all sold out. There were some mods in place. I think the main one was the Ultra 64. There were some options that involved a converter that used S-Video, Rad2X, RetroTink, etc. All these funky names kept popping up to me, and they all had a few things in common. Either they were way pricier than I was willing to spend, or they were out of stock. So I looked for alternatives, and turned to the forums to find people's opinions. One name that kept jumping out to me was Hyperkin. I had experience with the Hyperkin HDMI because I bought one for my Wii, even though people online were recommending component cables and expensive converters. I remember that when I bought it for Wii, I thought it worked as well as I needed it to, and it was worth the low cost. So I figured the Nintendo 64 counterpart would do the same acceptable job. I should clarify that I'm not against spending money on quality, nor am I against being a perfectionist when it comes to your gaming experience. What I don't like, however, is the fact that there never seems to be a solution for the gamers that don't want to spend a ton of money on an old console. Sometimes people just want to spend $20 to play their old game, and it shouldn't be frowned upon. The very first YouTube video I uploaded about a year ago was the Super 64 Flash Cart, which is a significantly cheaper flash cart than the EverDrive, and serves the same function if all you want to do is play Nintendo 64 games. It's a completely viable and more affordable option and shouldn't get the hate that it receives. Likewise, the Hyperkin HDMI cable should not receive the negative opinions I saw of it online. The cable has been connected to my TV for over a year now and has worked flawlessly for many game nights. In fact, I've used it to connect to my capture card for my Nintendo 64 reviews on this channel. There are people who claim that there's discoloration from the cable, but honestly, even if there is, it's hardly noticeable. The audio works fine, there are no broken pixels, and it's allowed me to easily play all of my games with a 4:3 aspect ratio. And the best part about it is how cheap it was. When I bought the cable, I also purchased a generic Amazon brand one for about the same price, and the blurriness between the two was night and day on my TV. It was crazy how much noticeably clearer the Hyperkin cable was in comparison, considering the similar price point. I imagine when someone uses an Ultra 64 or RetroTink or whatever, they also notice a significantly better video output compared to the Hyperkin, but they also spend about 5 times the cost, so I would hope they do. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if those higher end solutions make the game look less natural than it should. The Nintendo 64 was never meant to look as crisp as it does in some of the videos you see online. They make it look extra blocky and polygonal than it already is. Almost emulator-esque. My point with all of this is that if you're looking for someone who used the Hyperkin HDMI cable for a year to get their opinion, then I recommend going for it. Worst case scenario, it lasts you only 1 year and it falls apart and you're just out $30. I didn't notice any out of the ordinary sound or video quality. I didn't notice any input lag, no screen hiccups or weird moments. It's been a solid purchase for me, and honestly, if it was to burn out for me after this review, I'd probably just buy another one, because it lasted me as long as it did for the low price, even though I doubt it'll die on me. Just be aware that you'll have to plug in the included 6-foot micro USB cable to power the adapter. Actually, that's really my only criticism. The included micro USB cable needs to be plugged in order for it to work properly. When I first bought it, I tried plugging the micro USB into random ports into my media center, either my TV, sound system, or other consoles, and while playing, the screen would randomly just go black at times. Turns out that the cable needs more power than that, so I found that you can either plug the micro USB cable into a powered USB hub, or an old micro USB charger, or straight up just get an old phone power adapter you have sitting around with a USB port and plug it in. When I eventually figured that out, I ran into virtually no more problems with the cable. All my Nintendo 64 footage on this channel was shot with it, So if you like the way it looks on there, you'll like what you see on TV. And if you don't like the way my footage looks, then you're probably not my target audience for this video anyway. This video is a two-parter though. I figure it's about time I talk about the Hyperkin Nintendo 64 wireless Bluetooth controller. I didn't want to make this a hands-on review because I feel like the videos where people unbox hardware and click buttons doesn't really help me when I'm thinking about purchasing something. Rather, I figure I'll just talk a bit about the controllers and share my experience and opinions. I, as well as my friends, have used them for about a year now. Keep in mind, my friends and I don't really have any issues with the original Nintendo 64 controller and have been using it for over 20 years. For starters, the Hyperkin Admiral will set you back about $30 or $40 depending on which color you purchase and whether it's on sale at the time. It's not that cheap. And I realize the irony that just a few minutes ago I was talking about saving money and going with a cheaper HDMI option, but there aren't really any cheap options when it comes to wireless Nintendo 64 controllers. But honestly, the money you save on that cheap HDMI cable is much better spent on getting these controllers anyway. There are 4 colors available: purple, white, black, and dark gray. The colors really give off that vibe that Nintendo 64 controllers have, even though they don't have the middle peg for the third arm. The purple option is my favorite, and I wish they'd do more colors since the other 3 are kind of boring. Purple and dark gray are opaque, so they definitely give you that retro vibe too. I think I'd have preferred the black one to be the gray color of the original Nintendo 64 controller, because as it stands, the black controller and the dark gray one look very similar. Nonetheless, if you're looking to buy more than one controller, I'd highly recommend buying varying colors, otherwise it's going to take some effort to figure out which port the controllers are in. Each controller comes with a matching color receiver that plugs into the console. I'll get this out of the way from now. These are some of the ugliest dongles I've seen in my life, and if there's one thing to deter you from getting this controller, it should be the appearance of these. But as far as function goes, I have 4 plugged into my Nintendo 64 and they fit snugly and don't take up as much space as you'd think on the shelf. There are a couple of positives to these dongles though. First off, the fact that they're so big means that it's easy to tell which colored controllers are players 1 through 4. You won't need to remember which one is connected to which port since you should be able to easily see it. And perhaps the most important benefit, as well as the reason it's so big, you can plug your memory cards into these dongles. You'll also notice a slot for an SD card on here which allows you to transfer save files between memory cards, or upload or download memory files online. You still require a memory card though, and the SD card doesn't replace it. From what I've read online, you shouldn't plug anything else into this port though. Most notably the Rumble Pack for vibrations or the Transfer Pack for Pokemon games. The Rumble Pack for obvious reasons. I didn't personally try it myself, but feel free to upload a video of your Nintendo 64 shaking while you're playing Star Fox. The Transfer Pack not working is an interesting one though. Not sure why it's like that. But a good workaround is plugging your Transfer Pack into a regular controller into a separate port and just using the wireless controller. As nice as it would have been to include the port on the controller for Rumble and other purposes, I personally think the controller is better off without it. The lighter weight and battery life more than make up for it. Speaking of which, the built-in battery gives you about 6 hours of play, and it's play and charge, so you can charge it while you're using it, which is very nice. Weak battery life by today's standards, so you'll need to keep a charger nearby and remember to plug it in every few sessions. Other reviewers have stated that the controller has a range of about 30 feet. I play usually 15 to 20 feet away from my console and it's worked fine, so the 30 feet is probably right. I had basically no input lag in all of my play sessions too. Keep in mind, I'm using a Bluetooth controller and an HDMI cable, both of which people like to claim create input lag, and I didn't notice anything wrong with my input. Nor did anyone I was playing with. I'm talking for Smash Brothers, NFL Blitz, Pokemon Snap, Mario Kart. All the games that we've been playing for 20 years on older TVs and regular controllers felt the exact same while we were playing it. I'm sure someone out there could take a frame-by-frame comparison and find some lag, but if there was a difference in gameplay, it was virtually unnoticeable to us. Now, we may not be Mario 64 speedrunners or eSport competitors, but we're still frequent and competitive gamers and not casual by any means, so it was nice to not notice a difference feel in the games that we were playing. Speaking of which, the controller feels really good in your hands. It'll probably take you 1 or 2 sessions to get used to the weird form factor, but everyone that's tried those controllers has quickly said they couldn't go back to the original Nintendo 64 controllers anymore. One of my friends insisted he'd want the original controller, and after about 20 minutes of playtime on the Admiral, he changed his mind. The face buttons feel like the Nintendo 64 controller. The alignment of the button is comfortable too. All 6 of the buttons are easily accessible with your thumb without looking at the controller. It won't take long for muscle memory to kick in, and it feels natural in the hand. The D-pad being just under the joystick made me realize a lot more games used it than I expected. It's not game-changing by any means, but it's nice to be able to scroll through menus with a D-pad. Likewise, you can now easily hit the L button, which again isn't game-changing, but taunting in Super Smash Bros. Has never been easier. Although I'm not gonna lie, I miss swishing my right hand across the controller to taunt. The nicest addition in my opinion is the dual Z buttons. I wasn't sure how I felt about it at first, but it's nice to have an option to use either one of your fingers to hit the triggers. Using the left one is more in line with how original Nintendo 64 controller feels. but having the option to shield in Smash Bros. With the right one makes it feel more like my controls in Smash Ultimate that I'm used to. It also makes it easier to tell a casual gamer to just press any of the bottom triggers for Z. The other benefit is this controller is compatible with your PC and even your Nintendo Switch. You'll miss out on a second joystick, but it has more than enough buttons on there for a large library of games available. And finally, the joystick itself feels much better than the original, which makes sense since the Nintendo 64 was the first console with a joystick. I was worried that it was a little too small, but it feels very natural and is very responsive. The only real critique I have is how sensitive it is, but that was only really noticeable when we played the Ekans tossing minigame in Pokemon Snap, or minigames like Castaway and Mario Party. Anything that requires a light flick of the joystick was a bit harder. Not impossible, but definitely enough to force you to adjust what you're used to. Ultimately, I can't tell you that this is the best wireless controller on the market because it's the only one I've used, but what I can tell you is I bought 4 of these over a year ago, and I haven't used another controller since. Nor have I had any guests complain about them. Hyperkin has done really well for both the HDMI cables and the wireless controllers they've made for the Nintendo 64. I've had some awesome play sessions with both products, and honestly, I have very little to complain about. I initially purchased the HDMI cable and the Admiral controllers thinking I'd buy some other products to compare, but I've been so satisfied with what they provided that I don't see a point in doing so anymore. The Nintendo 64 is one of my favorite consoles, and it's often the hardest Nintendo console to emulate properly on other hardware, so it's nice to be able to grab a flash cart, an HDMI cable, and 4 wireless controllers, and get a very modern retro Nintendo 64 setup in my living room for less than $200 rather than somewhere closer to $400 or $500. That's all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Dean out.